Good afternoon to you. I'm Danilo Evangelista, and welcome to our tropical weather outlook video for today, Saturday, June 7th, 2025. We have a lot to go over today. This is going to be a pretty, or at least decently lengthy video, because on top of activity that is currently ongoing, including our both invests in the Eastern Pacific today, we're also going to talk about latest model guidance that has come out from the ECMWF seasonal forecast and some other model guidance as well to take a look at the broader picture to get an idea of what the rest of this hurricane season might bring. So we're going to talk about all of that today. If you are interested, please fasten your seatbelt, sit down, and enjoy the ride because we have a lot to go over today. Starting off with not the National Weather Service, but the NOAA Coral Reef Watch Sea Surface Temperature Anomaly Map. I always go over this every Saturday. We go over conditions in the Atlantic currently, and at least in terms of sea surface temperature anomaly-wise, right now the Atlantic continues to remain very warm all throughout the MDR. And I showed you earlier this week, the MDR seems to be warming up quite a bit, especially over the last several days. Sea surface temperature anomalies really spiked here, and I find that very interesting, especially because now we are in hurricane season, so we'll have to see if that does mean anything, although I'll show you in the model guidance in a little bit. Maybe it does mean something, but we'll see. But not only through the MDR, the Caribbean, the Gulf of Mexico, man, especially the Gulf of Mexico, very, very warm. And I mean, the Gulf will always be warm for development, especially once we get to the peak of the hurricane season. But man, is the Gulf of Mexico warm right now, and especially if this holds in through the peak. Once we get to the peak, would not be surprised if we get some sort of major development in the Gulf sometime this season. And it pretty much seems to be happening every single year, so we'll probably get it at some point. But especially that the Gulf is right literally on our doorstep and things are very warm, you would imagine it's very favorable for rapid intensification, especially as we get towards the peak. Meanwhile, in the Pacific, on the other hand, we still have generally, I mean, just compare the two, the Atlantic and the Pacific, you would obviously think that the Atlantic is warmer than the Pacific. Although activity will be high, where we are going to have a lot of activity, at least in the Eastern Pacific, for the next several weeks. And there are a few warm anomalies here closer to Mexico. But in general, at least talking about the season overall, we don't have an El Nino. Look at the equatorial Pacific. It's really a la nada, or ENSO neutral. No sign really of either El Nino or La Nina this year, although we could potentially tip the scale in at least a cooler state of the ENSO. But no El Nino, generally cooler than normal Pacific compared to the Atlantic. You would certainly think that is definitely shaping up for a favorable setup for a at least busier than normal hurricane season. And I showed you once again with the Eastern Atlantic really spiked in sea surface temperatures anomalies over the last several days. And it's gone back down a little bit. But I also mentioned this does fluctuate a lot, especially early on in the season, because we have Saharan air outbreaks. And that definitely has an influence on sea surface temperature anomalies and obviously, the regular sea surface temperatures. But the MDR warming up quite a bit. And now it's hurricane season. It's literally June. So the fact that we have a spike of sea surface temperatures like this, it's certainly interesting. I don't want to say concerning, because I think either way, we already know that this season will probably be above normal. But, if sea surface temperature anomalies are warmer in the Atlantic, it definitely would help. And, oh boy, I thought I had the Nino 3.4. Let me actually get that out for you right now. Here, the Nino 3.4 sea surface temperature anomalies, also by NOAA Coral Reef Watch. Compare, once again, the MDR above normal, especially warmed up quite a bit over the last several days. Compare that to the Nino 3.4, slightly below normal, not quite in La Nina, but it definitely is ENSO neutral neither El Nino or La Nina. And I always mention it, but I think the fact that we don't have an El Nino is much more important, in my opinion, for hurricane season than whether or not we have a La Nina. And we do not have an El Nino, and it definitely looks like we are not going to get an El Nino this year. There's nothing that indicates it. I'm sure we also get some periods of where we warm up a little bit, but then we go back down. Bottom line, we are not seeing a huge spike with the sea surface temperature anomalies here, especially in the Nino 3.4. Not especially like we saw here in early March. There's just really no indication that we're going to get an El Nino this year. So I think it's officially time to put that to bed. There's no way it's going to happen. And just looking at the SOI too, you could also see positive. And I also mentioned, if you've been following my videos since December or since the off season, I would always bring up the SOI map every single week on Saturday. So I guess we're continuing that tradition into the season, although obviously we're doing our daily tropical updates, especially since we do have stuff that is out there in the tropics, and we'll go over that in a moment. But with the SOI in the positive territory, and I also mentioned the SOI too, definitely correlates to stronger trades in the Pacific. Also, not a favorable look for El Nino. So it is pretty much safe to say that we will not have an El Nino this year. And once again, just compare these two maps side to side, cooler in the Pacific and warmer in the Atlantic. You would imagine that we'll probably have at least slightly above normal season. And as a result, the Euro seasonal forecast came out this past week. It actually came out, I think, on Thursday. I should have, brought it up when it did come out. But we're going to review it now. This is the Euro seasonal forecast for this hurricane season. And their latest June update indicates this is the accumulated cyclone energy. And their value is at 1.1. So that is roughly 110% if you were to correlate it to percent. 100% being the average. So it's 10% above normal, I guess, if you subtract 110 from 100. Bottom line, the Euro seasonal forecast for June, as of right now, is indicating that we might have, at least from an ACE perspective, a slightly above normal hurricane season in the Atlantic. And then in terms of named storms, they're actually going more like near normal for named storm activity. And very interestingly enough, in the Eastern Pacific, they also indicate that it'll be near normal there. So a not so active Pacific, that's also an interesting sign for the Atlantic too. So both not very negative factors for this hurricane season. Once again, yet another sign. I really don't understand why a lot of people are doubting this hurricane season. Let me just say that. And I also released my forecast last weekend on Sunday, if you saw that. If not, you can review the live stream I did last Sunday. And it's also on Twitter too. And if you've not followed me on Twitter yet, I'm at Danilo Evangelista, same name as I have here on YouTube. And my hurricane forecast from last weekend is pinned on my page. So if you want to check it out, please feel free to do so, and I encourage you to. And I said I think that this season will be an above normal year. I guess maybe you would have some doubts though if you look at the latest NMME map, which this actually came out today. So I'm showing you this hot off the press. And in general, if you were to look at this, you would probably think that maybe this is not a super active hurricane season. No very strong anomalies that really stand out, especially if you were to compare this to last year. Although it's not like it's completely bone dry out here in the Atlantic, and this is for the August, September, October period, which is the peak of the hurricane season. But interestingly enough, quite a bit of precipitation anomalies that are higher, closer to land, and I've actually seen a lot of people talk about maybe this year being a year where we're not necessarily talking about the MDR a lot, but maybe we could get a lot of closer to home development. And that's especially interesting when I just showed you the sea surface temperature anomalies, places like the Gulf and the Caribbean and off the southeast coast. it is very, very warm. And obviously that could change, but it really doesn't change a lot, especially once we get to summer. Things kind of stay stable with sea surface temperature anomalies, except for the Eastern Atlantic, which especially seems to warm up a lot once we get to the summer and the African monsoon really turns on, and we see a weakening of the trades out in the Eastern Atlantic, which I think will happen this year. And clearly, we're already starting to see some of those effects, given that once again, very interesting that we saw a huge spike in sea surface temperature anomalies. But once again, when it comes to ENSO, look at this sea surface temperature forecast from the NMME. This is for the peak of the hurricane season. And what do you notice in the Pacific? You see a lot of these blues, below normal sea surface temperatures indicated by the NMME. So this would indicate to me, in the very least, probably cool neutral. In fact, I actually wonder if this is kind of knocking on the doorstep of maybe a weak La Nina. And there's not that much of an indication that La Nina is going to make a huge return this year. We're not a lot of the forecasts, at least not a lot of the models that I've seen, really indicate La Nina coming back this year. But I definitely wouldn't rule it out, and it would definitely make this hurricane season more interesting if we do return to at least a weak La Nina. And once again, I've said it really seems to be those ENSO neutral years, like what this year is generally expected to be. It generally is those ENSO neutral to weak La Nina years that sometimes really tend to produce surprises in the Atlantic. So we'll see what the next 183 days bring us. Well, now it's more like 177 days, because actually more like 176, because today's June 7th, so this is the 7th day of the season. We'll see what the rest of the hurricane season brings. But for now, though, once again, things quiet in the Atlantic. In terms of current activity, at least for the foreseeable future, don't have to worry about anything yet active in the Atlantic, although just by showing you what I showed you now with the seasonal guidance, I'm pretty sure we will get quite a bit of activity in the Atlantic come later this year. But for now, everything is in the Eastern Pacific. 3 areas of interest now. A new area very close, right off the southern coast of Mexico. And once again, I've been mentioning to you over the last several days, the Eastern Pacific is really going to light up for the next few weeks. As we head into June, conditions are very favorable right now. We obviously have the MJO moving through, which is allowing for this CAG, Central American Gyre setup, which is really aiding in a lot of development in the Eastern Pacific. And obviously, we'll have to see if anything does form or try to form within the next few weeks in the Atlantic. But at least in the Atlantic side, nothing at least over the next 7 days. Once again, all the activity in the Eastern Pacific. We have among that activity, Invest 91E here, which has a high chance of formation within the next 48 hours and the next week. And 92E, which also has a high chance of development within the next 48 hours. In fact, I'll show you in the satellite imagery in just a moment. I would not be surprised if 92E forms as soon as later today. And then once again, maybe something else behind these two systems that develops as a part of this Central American gyre that is setting up right now in the Western Hemisphere over Central America and the Eastern Pacific. It's definitely active in the Eastern Pacific for right now, and it'll probably stay that way for the foreseeable future. Here's the latest satellite loop of the Eastern Pacific, and there you can see our 2 areas of interest. This is 92E over here, and this is 91E. They are kind of associated with this mess within the ITCZ here in the Pacific. They kind of look a little messy. Both of them not necessarily organized yet to be classified, although especially if you look at 92E here, it's very close. And let me actually zoom in for you here on 92E, and let me really quickly get a new satellite loop. And we actually have some convective bursts right now. I'm not sure if this is exactly where the low-level center, at least for now, may be. But 92E has definitely gotten close. We've had quite a bit of convection blow up overnight with 92E. And just going back to this satellite image here, you could definitely make out where there is a developing low level center. So probably all it needs is a few more hours of some of these convective bursts. And I, again, would not be shocked if 92E becomes a tropical depression later today, maybe by 5 or 11 o'clock. We'll see. But in terms of impacts from 92E, I've been mentioning this as well over the last several days. We are going to have quite a bit of activity, but looks like everything is going to stay offshore. 92E, this is the model track guidance, at least as of the 12Z model runs. All of them keep this offshore of Mexico, so interests along Mexico, you don't have to worry about potential direct impact. Obviously, worry about rip currents and stuff like that. Maybe some showers from one of these outer bands, but no threats to Mexico directly, which is good. And intensity-wise, might actually be decent. A lot of the models are indicating that this might become a hurricane, so maybe 92E will become the season's first hurricane. We'll see. Most of the model guidance does bring it into Category 1 status. Some of them keep it on the weaker side and only bring it or keep it as a maybe moderate to strong tropical storm. So we'll see what 92E does intensity-wise, and I'll especially be interested to see what the NHC forecasts for the intensity. And meanwhile, with 91E, has a very weird track, again, because both of these systems are forming very close to each other, so they are going to interact with each other a little bit, and that especially seems to impact 91E. And once again, it's going to stay off the Mexican coastline, so I wouldn't worry particularly at all about 91E. And intensity-wise, too, this is actually interesting that one of these models, I wonder which one this is. I think this is the HMON that makes this a hurricane. I doubt it, since most of the models kind of have 91E as the weaker one. And you could clearly see intensity forecast guidance compare 92E to 91E. Pretty much every model expects 91E to be stronger, or 92E to be stronger than 91E. But both are forecast to become tropical storms, at least by a lot of the guidance nonetheless. So we might have another two systems here in the Eastern Pacific very shortly. And taking a look at the GFS latest run from the 12Z today, so the run from this morning, they both show, the GFS shows both of these systems developing. Obviously, 92E being the stronger one. That definitely looks like a bona fide strong tropical storm, maybe even a hurricane. Let's see how strong it is, 982 millibars. So that's probably a hurricane. And then you could definitely see 91E ends up being the weaker one. And then they kind of interact. And especially since 91E, which is the one down here, is the weaker one, it ends up kind of getting absorbed, or the energy of 92E ends up kind of absorbing the energy from 91E, and in the process they kind of do this weird little Fujiwara effect, and that's definitely interesting. But once again, at least in terms of impacts to Mexico, you could see none of them make it anywhere even close to the Mexican coastline. So both of these are going to be, as we call them, fish storms, and that'll be that. And then eventually, over the next several days, as especially 92E moves to the west-northwest, it'll eventually run into cooler waters, and then you could see it over time. And you could especially see once it starts to run into cooler waters, it kind of begins to weaken and then eventually disintegrate. And then moving out to the next 7 days in the Eastern Pacific, you could see another storm begins to develop right behind it. So the Eastern Pacific is going to stay active over the next several days to at least the next week. And then meanwhile, let's really quickly take a look at in the Atlantic. Nothing, at least over the next week, although the GFS still has some development trying in the Western Caribbean. But obviously, you have to be skeptical of that because the GFS always seems to do that, especially this time of year. And for now, none of the other models indicate development in the Atlantic. It's all in the Eastern Pacific for now. So I guess we could kind of put aside any expectations we might have for the Atlantic for now, and at least you could say things will be quiet in the Atlantic for the foreseeable future. But maybe the GFS might be onto something. Again, I mentioned the Central American gyre setup, due to the MJO moving through, will make conditions in the general sphere of the Western Hemisphere, including the Eastern Pacific and maybe the Caribbean. Things will generally be favorable because of the Central American gyre setup, which we typically get around this time. And I showed you with the sea surface temperature anomalies, it is very warm, especially in the Caribbean and Gulf. So we'll see if something tries to develop, especially once we get towards mid-June. But in terms of any solid signals for now, nothing eye-popping, at least for now, in the Atlantic. Once again, all the activity in the Eastern Pacific. With that being said, I'm going to wrap it up for today's video. I really hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please give this video a like, comment your thoughts below. Any questions you might have, I will respond. And subscribe if you're new to the channel. Please go ahead and subscribe. It's free. Turn on the notification bell as well so you can get whenever I upload videos the moment I upload them, because I upload these videos every single day, and especially whenever we have big storms, which I'm pretty sure we'll have at some point in the season. You can get videos the moment I upload them. And also follow me on Twitter or X, whatever you want to call it. I'm at Danilo Evangelista, the same name that I have here on YouTube. Thanks for watching today's video. Enjoy the rest of your day. Stay safe. Peace, love, and kindness to all of you. I will talk again tomorrow.